these challenges that have been brought before Israel in front of international courts, in front of the ICJ and the ICC, and in front of the court of public opinion, there is so much attention on this. There is so much that feels like it's at stake for international law or some semblance of it to be defended publicly and to be upheld. Do you think this is a turning point, a real, almost existential challenge to the way that the world trusts and sees value in these systems, in a kind of a unified, agreed upon document of law?
You can never trust these instruments of power. As the famous abolitionist, the American abolitionist, Frederick Douglass, who was a slave and then became active in the movement to abolish slavery, he once said, "Power never concedes anything without a demand. It never has and never will. Period, full stop. Power never concedes anything without a demand. It never has and it never will." You can't trust any institutions of power. You just can't. What has happened is there has been a confluence of forces which have now reached critical mass. There was the Hezbollah in the north. There were the Houthis. There was the ICJ. There was the magnificent application submitted by the South Africans. There was the tenacity of the South Africans. They started December 29th. There was a ruling January 26th. They went back to the court in February. They went back to the court in March. They went back to the court in May. They wouldn't relent. And then there were the student demonstrations. It starts on one campus and then it spreads and it spreads and it spreads. And before you know it, it spread to Europe. And those demonstrations put the Palestine question at a place in the public agenda, the public eye, which in the United States could no longer be ignored. Not that before it had been ignored. No, obviously it was in the headlines. But the student demonstrations added an element of momentum and moral impressiveness. You know, college nowadays is not like in my day. It's very expensive. Columbia is $80,000 a year. And getting in is not easy. Highly, highly, highly competitive, more so than my generation. And these students were risking suspension, expulsion. And when you're in one of those schools, you're working very hard to get into a good professional school, getting into a good law school, getting into a medical school. And one bad grade can bring down what's called in the United States your GPA, your grade point average. It's not easy to be in an encampment for a month or so and still do your papers and still do your studying and still preparing for finals. It was very, you have to say, it was very impressive. And to defy the administrations, not easy, not easy. So all of those elements, those unpredictable elements, who would have ever thought the Houthis would become a power in world politics? You know? Who would have ever thought the South Africans would go to bat for poor, powerless, stateless people in Gaza, in this godforsaken place, this godforsaken concentration camp called Gaza? And not just go to bat for them, but the level of professionalism. If you read their application, if you read each time before they went before the court again and again and again, each submission is replete with footnotes and references. This is not just a blank piece of paper on which they scribbled a few words. No, This required a team of researchers of a very high caliber. So anyone looking for a silver bullet that's going to, solve it, no. That's not how politics works. It's a confluence of forces which gradually reach at some point, to use the cliche, critical mass, and then they have some impact. Is it yet the impact one would like? No. But is it no impact? No. No, who would have thought that we would be debating whether or not Israel is a genocidal state? That was an unthinkable thought a year ago. Who would be debating? Now, there has been a claim that's plausibly genocidal. Other people say it's not plausibly genocidal. But the important point is that's become now a term of debate, whether or not it's a genocidal state. That puts Israel in a very, very ugly category, that we're even debating that issue. And we're debating it with credibility, where mainstream figures like Ken Roth, Aria Nair in the New York Review of Books are saying it is a genocide. It's carrying on a genocide. So there's been a dramatic shift in public opinion. As I already indicated, a shift of such magnitude that the entire legitimacy of the state of Israel has now been called into question, not just the occupation, not just the legitimacy of the occupation, but the legitimacy of the state itself. So it has been it's significant moment. And I don't think we don't trust these institutions. On the other hand, I think you can make the institutions work for us, but only if, as Frederick Douglass says, you make a demand, which is to say, you have to put your lives and your bodies on the line to force the necessary change.